All right, Larry. Larry, where'd you grow up? Where are you from originally?
Queens, New York.
Queens. And tell me about your family growing up. You had mom and dad?
Mom and dad, yeah, they were just working people. My mother ran, she was a seamstress, but she wound up running dress factories for a pretty big outfit. And my father just was a truck driver.
What kind of kid were you as a teenager?
How was I?
Yeah, what was
I
your...
was a defiant kid. I wanted to do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it, and probably I'm the only thing my mother ever failed at, trying to normalize me. I knew early on I just was different. Even I was very I had an obsession. I had to win, no matter what it was, marbles, Scully, whatever it was. I had to win, and and I did whatever I had to do it. I didn't want to be a part of a baseball team. I just, because there was other players on the team that might screw up and cause you to lose the game. I wanted to do something where I was in complete charge. And that's probably what saved me from getting involved in gangs, even though I did for a very short period of time, and be influenced by all the mob guys, because the neighborhood I grew up in, Italian neighborhood, and every Italian neighborhood was basically like Chaz Palminteri's movie, The Bronx Tale. Same thing. And you know, you're a young kid, 13, 14, 15, you get, you see pretty girls and big diamond rings and gold chains and nice cars, and that's what you want. And I stayed on that corner about a day or two until I found out that you kind of had to follow the leader. And I didn't want to follow any leader. I wanted to do what I wanted to do, and that's what I did. So in some ways, it saved me from getting involved. Even when I crossed the line, I crossed it by myself. When I got caught by myself. And when I succeeded by myself. Until my obsession with speed and competition and everything that I was obsessed about, until it turned into an addiction. And the addiction was a tough one. I never thought I'm a pretty strong guy. I learned through the years, based on other people around me. I realized that I'm a lot stronger willed than most, and I could adjust to any situation almost instantly, whether it's having 10 million in my pocket or owing 10 million. I just adjust. And the thing that saved me, because there were a lot of bad spots I got myself into, was music. And back then in the 60s and 70s, there was a nightclub on just about every corner in every neighborhood with music in it. And I just love music. If somebody said, look, when you walk out this door at midnight, you're gonna get shot in the head. I'd walk into the place at 9 o'clock, and from 9 until midnight, and listen to music, and that thought wouldn't even enter my mind. I'd just get zoned out. And that's what saved me. There were a lot of tough times I went through, and I just hopped into a nightclub, and the problem with that got to be later on, when I was doing what I did, was that every nightclub where the music was, where I wanted to go and had to go, was owned by a mob guy. And before you know it, they find out what you do and what you do for a living, and everybody wants a piece. Everybody wants a piece of the action. And normally I would tell them, I don't come into your place at the end of the weekend and take half the money that's in the drawer. Why are you asking me for information on races that I may have fixed but you can't say that, especially back in the 50s and 60s and 70s when the mob was the mob. And you just get caught up in that. If you want, I can tell you how it all started, or
Yeah, that'd be great. Horse racing was your addiction.
Well, yeah. From the time I was, I think 6 or 7 years old, I graduated from skates and skateboards and little box cars to I sent away for a kit that you could build a go-kart. In fact, that's how I ruined my eyes, because when the kit came, I had to sell like $500 worth of grass seed or something to get a kit mailed to me that included a pipe bender, electrical conduit pipe, and an electric welder with rods and a mask, and directions how to put it all together. And how I hurt my eyes was that when the rods got there, they were a little damp, and every time I'd go to strike it, I would lose the spark, and I'd have to pull the mask up, and that went on for a half hour until finally, when I got the spark, I never pulled the mask on. I just squinted my eyes. Well, I completed the frame of the cart, and about 2 or 3 hours later, it felt like somebody poured sand in my eyes, and I screwed up my eyes pretty bad. And ever since then, I wore black glasses. I'm trying now with these glasses that go light when you're in the
sun.
Yeah. And it's not working too good because I'm always squinting. But anyway, I started out racing cars. By the time I was 14, I built a stock car. I was racing that at Freeport, and I built a dragster. I had a 32 Ford Roadster in 1956. I was 16 years old. I put a 55 Chevy engine in it, and I won B Roadster every week at West Hampton on Sunday. And I built a dragster. And I was happy. That's what I wanted to do. I loved. I don't know which I liked better, speed and competition or music. Girls came third. And in fact, if a girl tried to bother me when the band was playing, I would just, do me a favor, go get out of here. And that's how zoned out I got with music. So through the years, the next maybe year and a half, 2 years, I had a room full of trophies from the stock car and dragsters, trophies and blankets. And to support that obsession, I crossed the line pretty good. I started robbing gas stations to get whatever money I needed to rebuild a clutch or put an engine in, or whatever I needed. And one day I blew the engine in a dragster, and I needed about $400 or $500. And robbing gas stations, you get $30, $40 tops. But I saw a gas station on Astoria Boulevard in 112th Street in East Elmhurst, Queens. They was having a grand opening. The guy had all brand new tires and transmission jacks, because in them years, standard shift transmissions, all the cars were turning over to automatic transmissions. So you had to have these big jacks to take them down. They weighed a couple of 100 pounds. And I says, that's the place I'm going to rob. And I did. I robbed a box truck, and the night before, and I broke into the building, and I started loading all this stuff up, and I sold it. And about 3 months later, I got a knock on the door. It was Detective Sands from the 114 Precinct in Astoria, Queens. And they took me down to the precinct and brought me upstairs, third floor. And they pushed a piece of paper in front of me, and they said, sign it. And I said, what is that? They said, a confession. And they said, listen, before you start, we have all the stuff you robbed. We have the guy who you sold it to. Just sign the confession, save yourself a lot of trouble. And me, like a 16-year-old wise guy, I says, I ain't signing nothing. Well, Detective Sands, and you got to remember, back in them days, it was in the 50s. There was no such thing as you have the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney. There was none of that. The first thing they did was open the drawer and put a pair of pliers on. And thank God I used to bite my nails, because if you didn't, they just attached the pliers to one nail, and if you didn't sign it, they'd pull it out or bring you in the back and beat the shit out of you. So I says, I'm not signing nothing. Detective Sands gets up, he walks around the desk, and he slaps me. When he slapped me, I hit him in the belly. Hit him in the belly. The other two detectives in the rooms handcuffed me to the back of the chair. Sands went and got a big book and started pounding me on the head until I was probably unconscious. My nose was bleeding, my eyes, my ears, everything. And they uncuffed me, and they asked me to sign it, and I wouldn't sign it. And they hit me again. I fell to the floor, crawled in the corner. They jumped on me, and the wind up, and I crawled in a fetal position. I remember them getting that pole that they used to push the windows up with. Big long pole. They started jabbing me in the ribs, and then I woke up in the Tombs, in 1-4, and I guess all the precincts, they have cells down in the basement. And 114 had 3 cells down there, and they had I think 140-watt bulb, 3 cells, 6 inches of water on the ground, rats as big as cats. And that's where I stayed until Monday morning. They put me down there Thursday night, I think. And Monday morning, they come and get me, and they bring me to Queens Boulevard Courthouse, I think. And you got to remember, this is 60, 70 years ago. Plus I'm old myself, and I forget a lot. But they brought me there, and my mother come and got me. And when she come and got me, my clothes were full of blood, all dried blood in my ears and my eyes, my nose, my mouth. My head was split open. My ankle was as big as a basketball. And I said, Ma, you gotta get me to the hospital. I can't breathe. And she says, and my mother was a good woman, but she'd been through years and years of trying to straighten me out, and I was just defiant, and I got beatings every single day, and it made no difference. And she never got a phone call. That was a good one from me, from school or from the time I was a kid. And she just about had enough. And she says, I'm going to take you where I should have taken you years ago. And she took me to her boss. The dress factories that she ran were for Tommy Lucchese. Tommy Lucchese was Three Finger Brown, one of the founding members of Cosa Nostra in the city. In fact, that crime family still carries his name. And he basically ran the city between the other 4 guys, mob bosses. And he said to my mother, leave the room, I want to talk to him alone. And I met him before. He came to my sister's wedding, so I met him before, but I paid no attention. It made no difference what anybody did. I just wanted to do what I wanted to do, and it made no difference to me if he was the president or he was a stumblebum. It made no difference to me. So he says to me, he says, your mother's a good lady, and she's my friend, and you're breaking her heart with all your nickel and dime bullshit. And I want you to go home, and I want you to think about who I am and what I said. And if you want to straighten your life out, I'll help you in any way that I can. And you'll never have a problem, including the one you have now. So just that talk from that guy, because then I realized who he was. My mother told me who he was at my sister's wedding when we had to put a table all the way in a corner for him and his 5 or 6 guys. And he only stayed an hour, and I says, where's he going? And she explained who he was and everything, which made no difference to me anyway, but I knew my mother always taught me to respect your elders, and so he was my elder, and I respected him, and I called him Mr. Lucchese. And so anyway, I went home, and on the way home, we went right to the hospital from there, and that's when I found out that I had 4 or 5 broken ribs. I was in the hospital a few days. And while I was in there and home, I thought about what he said, which I never thought about in my whole life. I never thought about breaking my mother's heart. I was very selfish. Like I didn't think about anybody. I never hurt anybody on purpose, but I did whatever I had to do to get the job done, and that was get money and race my cars. But I start thinking about this woman who raised me and taught me all the right things, and I knew all the right things, and that's why I knew what I was doing was not right, and I knew that I was different from the other kids. I was completely different. And I said, I'm gonna go straight. I'm gonna go straight. And I told my mother, I says, Ma, that I'm all done. I'll get a job, legitimate job and everything. So I did, but I wanted to get a job where I still had my obsession. I had a race. That's what I wanted to do more than anything in the whole world. So I went and looked for jobs in a gas station, and I knew the perfect gas station. It was open all night. So I went there, and it was on Northern Boulevard in East Elmhurst. It was an old black area, and it was a pretty bad area. It was between Jackson Heights, then East Elmhurst, and then Corona, which was all Italian. So there was Italian, black, and then Italian. And I went into the gas station. They were always looking for night help. They were on Northern Boulevard, which is probably the busiest boulevard in Queens, and it goes right into Manhattan. And they were open 24 hours, and they always needed a night attendant. So I went in there and I asked the guy, because he always had a sign at the window, because he used to work the nights until he got somebody. And I said, listen, I'll work the night shift if you let me park my cars there and work on them during my working hours. And he said, no problem, but there's something you should know. You're a young guy, and this area is not the greatest, and we get robbed every once in a while. And I said, that's not a problem for me as long as you allow me to keep my cars here and work on them. That was more important to me, besides the fact that I was the one that was robbing the gas stations at night, so that part didn't bother me. And that's what I did. And I worked, and for the first couple of months, I worked on my cars. I fixing them all up on Saturday, Fridays. I'd go to West Hampton, and Freeport, stock cars, and Sundays, West Hampton. And everything was going well. And whatever money I was earning, I was able to repair whatever broke down with the cars. And then one day a horse van pulled in, and he asked me to fill the truck up, and he asked me for a bucket of water. When I got the bucket of water, he's up in the truck with 3 horses. And I says, what are you doing with them horses? He says, I'm going to Yonkers Raceway. I says, you race them things? And he says, yeah. Through the conversation, I found out that you race horses for money. And with the stock cars and drags and roll, you get trophies. And he invited me out to the farm. I'll skip right through this because it'll go on forever. He invited me out to the farm. Within a year, he taught me everything that he knew, and he helped me get my trainer's license and driver's license to drive the trotters, not the thoroughbreds, the trotters. There's harness racing, that's what I was in, and thoroughbred racing. Even though later on I was in both of them, but this particular, my first license was for driver and trainer of harness racing. So I called up my mother and I said, Ma, I says, I got my license to train and drive horses, and I wanted to tell her that because I told her what I was doing, and she was anxious for me, and finally she was getting phone calls from me that didn't involve me in a hospital or in a precinct someplace, or in the dean's office in school. So she called me the next day, and she says, "Come home, I have something for you." So I went home. The horse farm was Ann Binder's horse farm out in Long Island. My mother lived in Jackson Heights. So I went home, and she gave me an envelope. In the envelope was $20,000. She says, "This is from Mr. Lucchese. He's very happy for you, and he said, buy whatever you need to buy, whatever horses, equipment, and if you need more, just let him know." And that's what I did. I went and bought some horses. I stabled them at the farm. And my mentor at that time was the guy who taught me everything, was Mike Foley, a trainer driver. And I applied for stalls at Roosevelt. Now, back then, in the 60s, Yonkers and Roosevelt were the two major racetracks for harness racing in the whole country. And all the top drivers and horses were there. And the license I was given was a provisional license. When you're just beginning, you're just in a provisional driver. I didn't know, but they didn't allow provisional drivers to drive at them big racetracks, the major tracks. And that was also the reason they didn't give me stalls. So I called up my mother. I says, "Ma," I don't know what to do. Mr. Lucchese gave me $20,000. I bought 4 horses. Everybody's happy, but now they wouldn't give me stalls to race them. And he says I have to go to all these small tracks out of town, and I don't know what to do. I don't have any money to go out of town. I've never been on my own with the horses. I don't know. So she says, "Let me talk to Tommy, see what he says." I says, "I just don't want him to think that I'm lying or anything." She calls me the next day and she says, "Take your 4 horses, ship them to Roosevelt Raceway. There's 4 stalls waiting for you." I says, how did he do that? And she says, "Well, the Roosevelt Raceway is owned by Morton Levy. And Morton Levy was the attorney for Frank Costello and Lucky Luciano and all them guys. So he was a mob attorney, and he owned the racetrack. So all it took was one phone call, and that's how I got in. And they also let me drive. And then there was a big stink because all these professional guys that were doing it their whole life, who's this kid? But I won 7 out of the first races there against the top guys in the country. And I got a big write-up in the newspaper, full-page write-up. And the reporter also interviewed some of the top drivers. The Stanley Dancy, George Schulte, and Billy Houghton, who were the top guys in the business at the time. And they all gave me good reviews. They just said, the kid has unbelievable talent, all good stuff. Schulte said, "I don't know who this kid is. All I know is you can't give him an inch in a close horse race." And that's because I beat him 2 nights in a row by an inch right at the wire. And I loved it. I loved horse racing more than I love racing cars. And you can't fall in love with a bumper or a fender, but you can fall in love with a horse. And that's what I did. So now I just loved taking care of the horses. And I learned through hanging with the veterinarians for years how to recognize lameness, how to treat lameness, and how to keep a horse's body sound in both body and mind. And I was good at it because I loved it. And during the day, I'd have Sinatra playing on the radio, and I'd be doing the horses, and I just loved it. When I got Roosevelt meet was over, I was getting phone calls from everybody because the newspapers put me on a pedestal, that I was the greatest and all of that stuff. And I did good, and I probably deserved what they wrote. but I wasn't used to that kind of publicity, and all of a sudden the phones start ringing. I start getting messages. Everybody wanted to give me their horses and money to buy horses. They wanted me to be their trainer and driver. And that's what happened. The meet ended, and I went to Yonkers Raceway, which is the same level as Roosevelt. Same people, same horses, same guys. The only difference is that Yonkers was owned by a sleazy guy called Marty Tannenbaum, who was, I found this out later, I didn't know at the time. He was just very, very politically involved with the Democratic Party and accused many times of embezzlement and everything. Just a sleazebag, but he owned a racetrack. And he got licensed because of his political connections. So anyway, I raced a horse one night, and strictly legit. I was 100% legit, to a fault. And I raced the horse legit, and I had to make a decision real early in the race, either to pull out or stay in. And we still had 3/4 of a mile to go, so I just says, I'll stay in, hopefully I'll get loose down the stretch. Well, I didn't. And I finished the race. I finished third, climbing over the winner. And what I found out later was that Marty Tannenbaum, he was partners with the biggest gambler in harness racing at the time. His name was Morty Finder. And I found, what I'm about to say now, I found out 15, 20 years later, that Morty Finder was partners with Tannenbaum on betting horses. Morty Finder was a legitimate gambler. In fact, Tannenbaum had his own window where nobody else could bet at that window except him. He had his own private teller, and they were partners. They put up 20,000, 30,000 each every night. And back then, they were getting 20, 30,000 people a night at the racetrack, and they were handling 5-6 million a night. So a big bet, a $10,000, $20,000 bet was not out of the ordinary for them kind of guys. But I got beat. They bet on me, and naturally, just like every other gambler, he had to make an excuse why he got beat, and so he called up Tannenbaum because they had a direct line to one another. Tannenbaum stayed in his office, and Morty Finder stayed at the table in the dining room, so they had the phone. And he says, we should have won. They bet 10,000 on me. He says, we should have won that bet. That kid stiffed that horse. We should have won. He went off at 3-1. We should have. So anyway, I didn't know this. I get back to the paddock, and the paddock judge says, he calls me. He says, the judges want to see you in the morning. Next morning, I go see the judges. They said, Mr. Tannenbaum gave you 24 hours to vacate the grounds. Get your horses out of here. And I said, for what? And they says, because he said it. He owns the racetrack. He has the right to do it. So I call up my mother, and I says, Ma, and I told her the problem. She says, well, I can't bother Tommy because he's in a hospital with a malignant brain tumor. And I had no choice but to pack up. I had some money that I won, and start going to all these small Mickey Mouse racetracks around the country. The problem with that was half the horses I had were better than the horses at these small racetracks, so they didn't write any races for them. So all I did was basically stable them there and kept them in training. The purse money was nothing, like a $10,000 purse at Yonkers or Roosevelt. They would race for, at the tracks I was at now, $800. And it was a joke. If you win, you get 50% of that. And it's just a joke. There was no money. And it was only a matter of maybe 6-7 months I was out of money. And I had to start figuring out a way how to feed these horses and how to eat myself. And between the other grooms there that were at the track, and you have to understand that all these small racetracks nationwide, they race for no money. Most of them race because they were either born into it or just for the love of the horse and racing. They all have, and everybody's broke. Half the people there are living in tack rooms and raising their kids on the dirt in the shed row, and it's pitiful. So what happened was one day after about 4 years of eating pigeons and bran mashes and oats and grass and whatever I could get, Lincoln Downs opened. They made a big advertisement. Lincoln Downs is a racetrack in Boston, and they always had thoroughbred racing there. And this was the first year they were going to try harness racing. So I applied for stalls there, and I was a little anxious because the purses would double there. So I'd be racing for decent money, and maybe I'd get races for all my horses. So I couldn't wait to get there. Sure enough, they gave me the stalls. I shipped up there. The first day, I have 2 horses in, and both morning line favorites. So I'm sitting in the barn in the morning, and down the shed row comes these 3 big guys. They look like the front line of the Green Bay Packers. Big guys. And they reach me and they say, you Larry Rolla? I says, yeah. He says, my name is Tony Shula. I'm with Winter Hill Gang, Whitey Bulger. We run everything in this town, including the racetracks. So if you're interested in making any money, we should talk. So I says, what do you have in mind? Now, at that time, you have to understand that I went through 3-4 years of eating pigeons and oats and grass. And I just wanted to jump up and kiss this guy as big and ugly as he was right on the lips, just for saying you want to make some money and the shot of making money. On the other hand, I grew up around these kind of guys, these big jerks that, mob guys that they just try to intimidate you, and there wasn't nobody that can intimidate me. I knew that life. I grew up with it, even though I was never a part of it, mainly because I could never follow the leader. I could never follow anybody. So he says, I said, what do you have in mind? He says, you got 2 morning line favorites. I'll give you 200 a horse, and just tell me the stalls they're in. I'll have my vet go down, and he'll do whatever he does, and the horses, they'll finish up the track, and you'll make 400. So I said, listen, I want 500 a horse, and tell your vet to stay home. And he looks at me like, he says, are you fucking nuts? Do you know who you're talking to? He says, well, it really don't make a difference who I'm talking to. He says, if you want a deal, we'll deal. That's the deal. So he counts out $1,000. He hands it to me. He says, you better be out of the money. You better be worse than third with both of these fucking horses, because I'll be back in the morning. I says, good. I says, bring coffee with no sugar and a bagel with cheese. And he looks at me and he laughs and he walks away. Well, the next morning he came back with the coffee and the bagel. And he won a lot of money. And he said, you did a good job. And I says, well, thank you. He says, you got one in tonight. He says, and if you can get anybody else that we can deal with, I'll give you a piece of all the action. And that was easy to do because everybody up there was broke. So within a week, I had 7 or 8 other drivers that we could bribe to be worse than third. And what they were doing, they were boxing. They'd get 3-4 guys out in each race. And the remaining 3, 4, 5 horses, they would box them in exactas or trifectas or whatever gimmick racing they had up there. And that's how they made the money. And once you left the favorite out, first and second choice, all that money remains in the win pool. So it makes no difference who wins after that. You get all the money. And that's what the game was. So one night, a couple of weeks go by, we're making a lot of money. Now I'm having steak every night, and everything is really getting good. And
by being a favorite, but purposely losing.
Yeah.
Got it.
Right. So once the favorite's out of the money, all that 90% of the money in the win pool is on the favorite. So once the favorite's out, all that money stays in the win pool. And even if a 100-to-1 shot wins, or even the third choice, you get all that money. So, or 90% of it anyway. And plus the 10, 20, 30% that the racetrack takes out for gimmick races, whatever. It's another story, another robbery. So one day, he comes to me. He used to come every morning. And as he's walking away, he says, listen, he says, you want any action? He says, I got an edge on some hoops tonight. And at that time, I didn't even know what hoops was, but I found out later on he was fixing college basketball games. So because I was doing business with him and making money with him, I wasn't going to start questioning him. I said, whatever you do for me. Next morning, he comes there, he gives me, I think it was 3,000 or 4,000. And I says, what's this? He says, I bet on the game for you. He says, and we win. I found out later he was fixing college basketball games. So every night, I would, I couldn't wait for him to come. You got anything? Yeah, I got 2 games tonight. And I was making more money with the college basketball games than I was fixing races. And I become obsessed with that too. So now I have girls, I have racing, and I have music, and now I have sports betting. And after about 2 months, that obsession became an addiction, a terrible addiction. And to jump forward a couple of years, I made millions of dollars fixing races in the next 2 or 3 years, and losing it betting sports. Because right after that, the football season came, and nobody ever wins betting. I think out of the 16 games, statistically, the player wins 3 times. You can't win betting football. But I didn't know that at the time. Plus, I had an addiction, and I didn't care. So I bet 10, 11 games every weekend, and so the bottom line was, I'll jump straight ahead. The bottom line was I lost over $1 million. I was betting with 2 guys. I was up at Monticello now at the time. And I was betting with the old Jewish Meyer Lansky guy who retired, Barney Cutler. And he was about 80 years old at the time. But he retired up in Monticello when he was taking action from all the guys around in that town. And a madman called Cabert, Robert Passaccia from Jersey. His nickname was Cabert. That's what everybody called him, Cabert. Now, I didn't notice at the time, but he killed 17 guys. He was Gotti's button guy in New Jersey. He was just a bad guy. And I was dealing with him. My friend introduced me to him. I was betting with both of them. So through the course of the year, I lose close to $1 million between betting with both of them. Now I ran out of money, but the addiction was overpowering. I know now that, because I could never understand, because I was such a strong-willed person that if you says, oh, I can't stop smoking, I'd say, well, then you're a jerk. You know, how could you not stop? I can't stop doing drugs. Well, you're a jerk. Well, I couldn't stop gambling. And I think gambling addiction is worse than the drugs and drinking, because all the suicides take place with gamblers, not drug addicts. Even they die of overdoses are not drinkers. And when you, if you're a drug addict, you could either stop or kill yourself. When you're a drinker, you could either stop or keep getting drunk. When you're a gambler, you go broke, and in my case, owe $1 million to bad people. And
what year was that?
That was 72.
Yeah, so $1 million back then is
a lot of money.
A lot of money.
Well, there's a lot of money. You know, that's all it's all relative. You know, back then the money when you're in that kind of action, it becomes monopoly money. It don't mean nothing. I mean, my father was making like $30-$40 a week, and I was making $4,000 or $5,000 a night. So it's all relative in whatever you're doing. So so now I made my last pay. It was always pay or collect on Tuesdays. So Tuesday come, and I paid what I owed, $70,000, $80,000, whatever it was, to both guys. And I would go give Kibert the money, and some girl, a very good friend, Gina, she lived in the same complex that Barney lived in, and she used to make the payment for me, make the bets and whatever it was for me. And she got very friendly with him because she lived right next door to him. And she used to go and make him coffee in the morning and have lunch with him, and they become very, very friendly. So Barney was never a problem. In fact, Barney was the one that says every time, once in a while, I go up there, and he would say, "Why don't you stop this? You're in a dead end. No, you can never win." And yeah, when you're addicted, you don't want to hear that shit. You just, yeah, okay, Barney, thank you. So now I have no money, but I have an addiction. So I get a hold of Kibert, and I said, "Listen," I says, "I'm going to Florida to buy some property," which was a lie, knowing that he was going to say exactly what he said. I says, "I'm going to Florida to buy some property. I won't be back for 2 or 3 weeks, so I'll see you when I get back." And knowing he was going to say, "Well, that's not a problem. Just call up. I'll give you the line, and you bet over the phone." And then I said, "Well, but if I lose, I won't be here to pay you." And then he said what I knew he was going to say. "Well, don't worry about it. When you come back, we'll straighten out." They didn't know I was broke. They just figured I was the cash cow, had a lot of money in a business where I was in big action. And they let me go. I go to Florida. 3 weeks later, I bet every week. 3 weeks later, I'm stuck almost $800,000. So now I can't make no more excuses. And I have a decision, either run away, kill myself, or go back. I went back. And Kibert's guy picks me up at the airport. And he says, "You want to go home? Because he's waiting for you." And I says, "I got no money." And he says, "Well, you got a problem." He calls up. Kibert tells him, "Bring me down the following morning." So the following morning, I meet him, and he brings me down to Kibert. He's down at Atlantic Highlands. They had a little goulash joint there, whatever. And just like a typical mob movie, in the room, in the corner is a little round table, 3 guys at the table with Kibert, smoking cigars, drinking Demi-Tasse coffee, and typical mob scene. So we reach him, and Kibert just gets up, walks out the back door. We follow him down to the boat basin. They park boats there. And we walked out on this deck, and they get to a boat, and they get on a boat. He brings me downstairs. They drive out in the ocean for a half hour or 40 minutes, whatever. And then the motor stopped. They bring me upstairs. They put me in this little drum, throw a couple of bags of cement in, pump some water in there, and here comes Kibert. He says, "Sammy let you go too far, and that's on him. You went too far, and that's on you. Now you tell me why I shouldn't let this cement harden and throw you the fuck overboard." And I said, "Because I could pay." And he said, "You could pay." And he looks at Sammy, and Sammy kind of stuck up for me. He says, "Well, boss," he says, "we got a lot of money, paid every week. He's in big action. He could pay." And so Kibert says, "You could pay, okay." He says, "You owe me $380,000. The other half I owed to Barney." He says, "I'm going to make this a Shylock loan, 2 points a week." Every week you come and see Sammy with 7,200. You miss 1 week and you'll be right back here with no turning back. All right, holds me off. He brings me back home. And I tell Gina. Gina makes the same deal with Barney. And that was the beginning of me fixing more races than anybody in the history of the world at major racetracks that involved all the top jockeys in the world. I had to come up with 16,000 a week, 15 of it just for VIG, just a VIG. So I don't know if your audience understands what VIG is. VIG is interest. The banks call it interest. The wise guys call it VIG. 2 points a week is 2% of whatever you owe. And that's what you pay. In my case, I owed 7,200 in VIG to Cabert, and none of that comes off the top. So you still owe that. So in other words, after 3 years, I paid him $1 million in VIG. I still owed the 380. So that's just to let your audience know what that is. So now I devised a plan, and I won't get into how or where because we'll be here until December. What I did and how what I did. I devised a plan through the help of an old retired jockey, and this is all documented, by the way. This is in all the newspapers. It was a big court case and everything else. So whatever I'm saying is not make believe. It happened, and I got a hold of Con Rico, who was not retired. He was an old time jockey that knew all the jockeys, and he still kept his jockey's license to ride at Yonkers, to ride at Aqueduct and Belmont. This is thoroughbreds now. And he knew all the jockeys. So through another jockey called, who was a good friend of mine, called Manny Ukaza, he was another Hall of Fame jockey, I met with Conorico and I made him a deal. And the deal was that if he can get to Ukaza, to Cordero and Baeza and all of the top jockeys that were riding at Belmont and Aqueduct, he could make a lot of money. I says, you think you can do that? And he says, of course I could do that. He says, all these guys, I raised them all. They owe everything they got to me. So I says, okay. I says, now, from this point on, you can't tell me things that you can't do for sure. You can't just say, yeah. You got to make sure. You know all these guys. You know who the good guys are. You know who the bad guys are. You know who you can trust. You know who you can't trust. Here's the deal. Every day, you go to the track, you get the program, and you look at all the races and try to pick the short fields, meaning 8, 9 horses fields, and try to get the first, second, and third choice out. Now, let's say, for instance, Angel Cordero's on the favorite. Give him $5,000 to be worse than third. Say Baeza's on the second choice. Give him $5,000 to be worse than third. And then the third and fourth or fifth choice, see who you can get out. Try to get another 2 guys out. Give them $2,500 apiece. Now, for every guy you get out, you get $1,000. So if you get 4 guys out of the first race, you're going to make $4,000 just for that one race. And the drivers will get $5,000, $5,000, $2,500, $2,500. So each race that you fix for me will cost me between $20,000 and $25,000. I'm going to bet another $25,000 leaving them horses out, boxing the remaining 4 horses or 5 horses, whatever is in there. Because like I said before, once the favorite, especially first and second choice is out of it, all that money is still in the pools. And so I just take $20,000 and just box the remaining 4 horses for the rest of the money. And all I'm looking to do is double my money, which many times you wind up winning a lot more than that. But just double my money. Do 2, 3 races, 4 races a day, and you double your money. You wind up with $200,000 a day, or right around there. And that's what my plan was. And so to do this, I hooked up Tony Schuler, who was the guy, Whitey Bulger's guy, who followed me up to New York. And I put him in Conorico in a hotel right off the Long Island Expressway, right near Aqueduct and Belmont Racetrack. And every morning, Con was to go to the track and see what he could do, come back and tell Tony. Tony called me, and Tony would bet at the racetrack, and I would send my runners to all the OTB offices around. And that's what happened. And because of that, I was able to make my VIG payment every week, plus take care of my houses and the girls and my nightclub life and all of that, and things were good. Until 2 or 3 weeks later, when Tony, from calling every day, he started to call every other day, then every third day, and then every fourth day, and then once a week. And then he stopped calling at all. He never called. I drove up to the hotel. They checked out, and I was surprised. I wasn't surprised at him because he was a fat, phony fuck who I didn't like, but I made a lot of money with him. I just didn't like him. He just threw his weight around, thought who the hell he was, and always pulling that wise guy shit, even though he didn't with me. But threatened all the jockeys and everything when he didn't have to do it. And that created a couple of problems, probably one death, a couple of bad beatings, and he was just not a nice guy. But a guy who, you make a deal with the devil, what are you going to do? And, you try to get out of it, and it's tough. But this was a perfect time for me to just show a little strength, something I didn't want to do, but I have one problem. Well, I have a couple of problems, but one of them is I have a problem turning the other cheek, especially when I'm right. That could never happen. And this guy just out and out, he's just a fucking beat artist, and he thought who the fuck he was, and he forgot that the same way he grew up is the same way I grew up, and it ain't gonna work. So I start getting myself in trouble because the money I was making, I never made enough money in 1 week to pay off Cabert, because that's who I wanted to pay off. I never made $400,000, $380,000 in one lump sum in 1 week where I could have just went to him and said, here. I never did that. Probably what I could have done was maybe go to him with $100,000 or $150,000 and say, listen, here's $100,000, take it off the top, let me pay the 2 points on 280 instead of 380. But I never did that. Maybe he would have did it, maybe he wouldn't. I don't know. He was a fucking madman. So now I'm getting myself in a bit of a problem. My savior was Charles Slutsky, who owned the Neverly Hotel and Monticello Racetrack. I won't get into how we became such close friends because I can't get into everything. It'd be too long. But he became a very, very good friend, and he knew the problem I had. And he allowed me to cash checks up to $50,000. And for times like this, when Tony wouldn't call, I started a 3-state kite going. I opened up checking accounts in New York and in Delaware and Pennsylvania. And I started a kite going. So and back then they had no computers, so it would take 10 days. I could cash a check from, say, Delaware at the racetrack for, say, $30,000, and they would cash it, and I had like 10 days to make that check good. So as long as I had cash flow, and that's what a kite does. You just go from state to state to state, have a place to cash them, just make sure that check never bounces. And as long as you have cash flow, you could live like a millionaire and not have a penny, as long as you have cash flow, as long as you can juggle. So that's what I was doing. And Gina was helping me a lot in that area, running around from state to state and depositing monies and all of this stuff. And one day, one of my runners, Charlie, he comes to me and he says, Larry, he says, there's this guy in Philly, one of Scarpa's crew, Scarfo. I think his name was, I think they called him the Crow. I'm not sure. And he said he has counterfeit money. You buy 10 cents on the dollar. You buy 100,000, costs you $10,000. And he showed me one of them, and they looked really good. And I says, okay. And I bought 100,000 worth, and then we were going to mix it in with some of the other money through the bets and everything. Plus, I had a couple of tellers that would, I'd give them $100 or something. You could bet $1,000 and just try to wash the money. And Charlie tries to go buy a car with some of the counterfeit money. He got caught, goes to jail. And I went up to see him one month, and he says, there's somebody I want you to meet. So I go meet him. I met him, and who was it? Frank Collada. Now, Frank Collada, for you folks who don't know, Frank Collada was Tony Spilatro's button guy. The Chicago crew sent Spilatro and Frank Collada to Vegas to kind of watch the skim and take over that whole town, which they did. In fact, the movie Casino, that's what it's about. And Joe Pesci played the part of Tony Spilatro. And I think Frank Collada had a part in that movie. He played himself. But anyway, I meet Frank, and Frank tells me, he says, Charlie was telling me he had a problem. He says, and I think I can help you with this problem. He says, I get out in a month or whatever it was. He says, here's my mother's phone number. Call me, and we'll see if we could straighten this mess out. He says, can you hang on till then? And I says, well, I got no choice. I'll hang on. So he gets out. I call him up, and I go see him. And he says, listen, we got to go see Tony, but I'm on parole. I'm not supposed to leave, but he won't see you without me, so we're going to fly to Vegas. We fly to Vegas. I tell Tony the whole story. And I says, if this guy calls, we'll be able to make 2-3 solid bets every day. And Spilatro was another sick gambler. And at the same time, I think it was the Stardust Hotel was opening up a sports book that same year. Plus, there were many, many, many bookmakers, independent bookmakers that Spilatro basically threw out of town. He was dying to bust them out. Plus, he had his own bookmakers. He didn't care if they busted them out because they come back to him for money, and he'd charge them a couple of points for the money, so he didn't care. But we did it. He winds up sending me, we fly back with 3 guys. One of the guys was Blitzstein. I forgot. Blitzstein, I think, is a big, gigantic guy. Bottom line is they fly back, we wind up looking for them, and we find them. And they stick a gun up his mouth, almost through his head, and the problem was solved. Now we start making money again. Tony Spilatro's happy, Frank Collada's happy, everybody's happy. And we're making a lot of money. But still, not enough to, in one shot, to straighten that thing out. So after about a month, they have to go back. So when they go back, naturally they threaten them, but naturally they went back and Tony started the same bullshit. And then they left the state, I think. And the reason, well, I know they left the state, and I found out later why and how they left the state. They went up to Hazel Park in Detroit. And Hazel Park was run by the whole Detroit mob. and they were being investigated, and Tony falls right in the middle of that, trying to fix races up there. And that's when he got arrested, and that whole mob up there got arrested because they were trying to do something at Hazel Park, which the mob owned. So anyway, I jumped about a year ahead. But now, during this time, when Tony disappears again, I find myself in trouble again making these VIG payments. And I was kiting like crazy, and it was just getting tough. And the races I was fixing at Monticello, they had no handle there. I mean, so even though I was fixing 2-3 races a day and fixed the last race superfecta every night, I still couldn't reach the 15,000, 16,000 I needed every week. And I was getting myself potentially in a bad spot. And then one day I got a call from the maitre d' at the Concord Hotel, where I used to go every single night. And they had the biggest nightclub, biggest lounge, the best bands. And I was there every night. And I get a call from the maitre d', who I knew very well. And he says, Larry, he says, maybe you do me a favor. I got some friends up here from the old neighborhood. They came up to see Natalie Cole's opening debut at the Raleigh Hotel, but they can't get rooms, and they can't get seated in the showroom. So can you help them out? So I went to meet him, and who is it? It's 4 black guys. It was Nicky Bonds, and Robbie, Jazz, and Leon Batts. That was part of that council crew they had in Harlem. Nicky Bonds was one of the major drug dealers, in case you people don't know, in Harlem. And I had horses at the time with Bobby Parker, who owned the Concord. I had horses with Manny Halbert, who owned the Raleigh Hotel. I had horses with Slutsky, who owned the Monticello Raceway and the Nevele Hotel. I had horses with all the hotel owners up there because of Slutsky. So I made a call, and naturally I got them rooms. I got them front table for Natalie Cole, and so naturally they thanked me. They wanted to give me money. I wouldn't take it, and they said, well, let me buy you dinner. I said, I've got to be at the racetrack tomorrow night. So they said, we'll have dinner in the dining room, and that's what we did. So after dinner, I said, listen, it was nice meeting you guys. I have to go. I have a horse in the last race. So Nicky says to me, he says, tell me what you say. It was a superfecta race. Last race at Monticello. So I says, look, you can't bet, there's no handle here. I says, we just fix it every night, and each of us get a ticket. We win 2,000-3,000 each, and that's it. So he says, well, all right, but I want to see you after the races. I says, I'll meet you at the Concord. I meet him at the Concord, and he says to me, he says, listen, he says, I can get down 5,000 a position on horse racing. And I says, Nicky, I says, look, I don't mean no disrespect, but there ain't a bookmaker in the world going to take a bet on trotting races. It ain't going to happen. Much less 5,000 a position, meaning 5,000 win, 5,000 place, 5,000 show. And he says, they'll take it. He says, he was betting with Fat Tony Salerni from the Gigani crew, from the Genovese crew. Because Robbie had Nicky had a gas station. I think it was 125th Street, or I think it was 125th Street, Lenox. It's the property now where Al Sharpton has his building. That used to be Nicky's gas station, garage. And Fat Tony had right down the street. He had where his club was, where they used to hang out. And he says, "Listen, we bet over close to $2 million every week on sports with Tony. He'll give me a courtesy bet." And I says, "He won't give you. It'll never happen." So he says, all right, I'm going home. I'll call you. He calls me the next day. He says he'll take the 5,000 position. So now I was in big action, but it was a different way of fixing a race. Before, I used to eliminate 4 horses and eliminate the gamble from gambling. Now, I couldn't box 4 horses. I needed a winner. And I couldn't get 8 guys out of a race. So I had to figure out how I could bet on a winner and at the same time eliminate the gamble from gambling. The only way you could do that is to switch horses. So at the time I had about 30 horses in Monticello. So I got a hold of the equipment guy who I knew for 10 years. And I says, Ronnie, I says, listen, I says, I'm going to make you an offer. If you don't want to do it, make believe we never had this conversation. I says, I'm going to bring a horse in. I says, now just to give you an example and for your audience, let's say it's a $3,000 claiming race. And I'm going to, instead of bringing that horse in, I'm going to bring in a $20,000 claiming horse that looks identical to him but with a different tattoo. You're going to have you're going to get $1,000 for every horse that I have in. Just pass them by. Just look at the tattoo, make believe it matches, and just go. So if I have 2 horses in a night, you'll get $2,000 a night. If I have 10 in a week, you'll get you'll make $10,000 a week. So he agreed. So that's what I did. I just switched horses back and forth. Naturally, they weren't claiming races because I wouldn't put a $20,000 horse in a $3,000 claiming race. I just used that race as an example. They're all condition races. So that's what I did, and we made a lot of money. I would get half of the $2,500, the $5,000 bet. $2,500 of it would be me, and then to pump up the odds a little bit, I would send one of my runners to the track, and let's say I was driving the 5-horse. I would send him up, and everybody knew he was my runner in the whole grandstand, so I'd send him up with a couple of hundred to bet on the 7-horse. So now word get through the whole grandstand, Larry's betting on the 7-horse, so the whole racetrack bets on the 7-horse. They make him the favorite. The horse I'm really betting on is my horse. Them odds went up. We made a lot of money. But that only lasted for maybe three months. And then the whole Harlem crew got pinched. They all went away for life. And then that ended again. So now I'm right back to the same place I was back to before, only worse now because there was no finding Tony because he got pinched at Hazel Park in Detroit. So now there's no way for me to make this. So I went to see Bert, and I said, listen, I says, I've been paying you now 2 points on this money for almost 3 years. You got almost $1 million in VIG in them 3 years. 3 times more than what I owe you. 2 times. And I can't do it no more. The feds are starting to close in. The commission's starting to close in. Everybody's starting to close in. Shula got arrested in Detroit. And before something happens, because I don't want to have, if I go away, I don't want to go away owing you money and then have a problem in jail. So whatever I give you from now on, stop the VIG, let it come off the top, and I'll do my best just to get even up with you. And he agreed. And I made the same deal with Bonnie. And things were going along all right, because even if I had 2,000, I would go down there. If I had 10,000, I would bring it to him, and he kept knocking off the balance. And then one day, Gina calls me, and she says, Barney's not doing well. He's the last couple of days, he won't get out of bed. He don't want to eat. He don't want to ding. And I says, all right, I'll come up there. And I looked at him. I said, Barney, we've got to get you to the hospital. He said, no, I'm not going to no hospital. So I leave. And next day, she calls me, and she says, Barney's in bad shape. I go up there again. I call an ambulance. They take him to the hospital. When he gets to the hospital that night, me and Gina have dinner, and she says, you know, he told me that he left me something in his closet. There's a shelf. He says, move the shelf out of the way, and there's something there. He wants me to have it all. He has no family. He has nobody. So I says, well, what was it? She says, I don't know. I didn't look. And I says, well, let's go look. there was over $400,000 in it. Probably most of it was my money anyway, but it was over $400,000. I took that money. I paid with the balance of what I owed Cabert. Me and Gina went to Florida, had a good time, and that's basically the end of my race fixing career, with a lot left out, a lot of good stuff left out. How I did it, and where I did it, and I went into a few other things that we can't get into now because it'll go, but a few other exciting situations. So I know we don't have all day here, so basically that's it. That was, and what I did was I created the biggest race fixing scheme that was successful in the history of horse racing. Through it all, I met a lot of top mob guys because I was in a nightclub every night. Every nightclub was owned by a mob guy. And sometimes that got me in trouble because you go in a place and there's a certain band that you're following, and you go in there and you get a front table, and you're helping the guy out with a tip because after a few times, in fact, I'll tell you, I'll jump back right into the middle of it. In 1974, John Gotti gets a hold of me. Now, John Gotti, I know John from we were kids. When I was 16 years old and thrown out of school, my mother, for punishment, put me first on the waterfront with my Uncle Pepe, and then I kept losing my money in crap games every day. So she got me out of there, and she put me with my cousin Pete at Midstate Spectre in Maspet, a trucking outfit. And they put me on a night shift, gassing up tractors. And one day my cousin calls me and he says, listen, he says, tell John Computer, the guy who was the switcher, tell him to park these three trucks coming in, Cuddy Sock whiskey. Tell them to detach them in the Hold'em yard. They're going to be here for a couple of weeks, and gas up the tractors, put them back up front. So when I was there, naturally I was robbing back then. Now I'm back to being 16 years old, and I still needed money for my cars. And I was robbing all the big trailer truck tires, and stocking them in the garage where I had my stock car. And I robbed the 3 trail loads of Cuddy Sock whiskey, and I needed a fence. I needed a place to put them. And back then, because you're a thief and robbing, everybody knows everybody. So I got a hold of, through a friend of mine, John Gotti, who was 17 years old at the time, just like myself. And he had a guy that had a bunch of catering halls, and we sold the 3 trail loads of Cuddy Sock whiskey to him, unloaded them, we whacked up the money, and that was my first meeting with John Gotti. And we did a lot of stuff after that as far as swag goes and everything. So anyway, and right around 1974, he gets a hold of me and he says, I heard you doing something with my man in Jersey, because word gets around like crazy. When you're fixing races and doing well, word gets around. Before you know it, everybody knew. So I said, yeah, and I told him the story, and naturally there was nothing he could do for me, because when you're wrong and you owe a mob guy money, you can't have nobody step in for you, because the mob guy has all the right in the world to say, he owes me the money. You want to stick up for him, pay me the money. So, but John did say, I'll see what I could do, which I knew was bullshit. He couldn't really do anything. But I told him I would help him out, and I did. And one day I met with him, and he said, listen, he says, if you ever find a nice horse, he says, I'll buy a horse. He said, maybe we can have some fun. So to make a long story short, I found him a horse, $5,000. Horse had 8 quarter cracks. You don't know what that is, so I won't get into that, but I patched them up, I fixed them up, and the horse was ready to win. And I was bought from Yonkers at the time. I gave him to Hervé Filion, who was the leading driver in the whole world at that time, but a good friend. And I said, Hervé, and I told him the story about the horse. I says, he's classified in the cheapest class. He'll win all the way up to the best class. He'll win 10, 11 in a row. I don't want you to fuck around. I want to win with this horse. I told him who owned him. I says, and all I want from you is give me 2 horses every week that I could use in exacta races underneath them or in trifectas. And he did. And I would meet his one of his top guys, Frankie Locascio, who was with the Bronx crew. Well, he was from the Bronx, but he was with Genovese. Gambino. And I would meet him every night, tell him, and John wound up making a lot of money. The horse won 11 races in a row. And I put the horse under my mother's name. He won 11 races in a row, win over $100,000 in purse money. John calls me one day and he says, I got to see you. He says, we got to get rid of the horse. I think I'm going away. I can't beat this rap. And he did. He wound up going to jail, but not before I sold the horse. I come there with all the money. And he gave me half of all the money. Aside from all the money we made gambling, he gave me half the money, half of 200 and something thousand. He gave me half of it, and he wound up going to jail. So these are all little bits and pieces of stories that I left out, but we can go on forever. But
Maybe we'll do another one day.
we'll do whatever you want to do.
What have you learned? I mean, is the whole world corrupt?
Well, I'll tell you, you learn a lot of things when you're put in the positions that I was put in, being rich one day, poor another day, being involved with mob guys. You learn a few things. You learn that not to trust anybody. You learn that everybody has a price. You learn that connections and money can probably get almost anything done. You learn how to read people, so it keeps you out of a lot of trouble. I mean, right now, I could walk into or meet somebody, and within 2 minutes, I just know this is not a guy I want to be around. You just learn how to read people, whether it's their face, the way they talk, the way they carry, the way their ears are set, eyes are set, whatever. It's just that when you pay attention to that from the time you're a kid, you learn these things. And the thing that I learned that bothered me the most was in 1981, I won a major race. I won one of the cane pace. It was like one of the races in the Triple Crown. It was the biggest harness race in the country, and I won it. And that year, in 1981, I decided to have a Christmas party for all my friends and their families. And I couldn't find a place. I tried Madison Square Garden for the entertainment. I tried to get Fats Domino, and I had all the money I needed, so that wasn't a problem. This was in 81. And I found a place. I was having trouble getting the Madison Square Garden catered, but the biggest problem I had, I had over 3,000 people on my list, and I couldn't find rooms in Manhattan. So I go call up Bobby Parker, and I says, Bobby, I want to have a party. You close your hotel, the Concord Hotel, every year for 10 days, general cleanup. Open it 3 days early. I want to hire your whole crew, your whole staff, and I need it for 3 days. I'm having a party. He says, no problem. The only problem is I can't hold 3,000 people. You got to cut it down to like 1,100. So I sat with a friend of mine and we tried cutting it down. Now here's the moral of the story. At that time I thought I had 3,000 friends. And it was a hell of a job cutting it down to 1,000. And 5 years later, I'm on a park bench, broke, and I called up a friend of mine for a pistol. I was going to rob the bank down the street. And he don't show up, but he shows up. Who shows up? My friend Joe Murata, the guy who helped me cut the list down from 3,000 to 1. And he says, what are you doing? I says, Joe, I lost all my appeals. I got no license. I don't know what to do. I'm fucking penniless. I've been living off all my credit cards. They all reached the limit. I'm $80,000 in debt with that. He says, I've been sleeping on this fucking bench now for the last 3 days. I've been eating down in the supermarket. I go down there, I fill the cart up with everything, and while I'm walking through the aisles, I'm making sandwiches, and then I just leave the cart. I says, but the next supermarket's fucking 5 miles away. I can't be walking. I says, so I had it. I says, fuck it. I said, I'm just going to take a shot with the bank. If I do it, I'll have 3,000-4,000. If I don't, the state will feed me. He says, get in the car. Get in the car, and he takes me to Angelo's restaurant, and he buys me lunch. He says, remember that day 4 or 5 years ago? I helped you knock. You didn't know who to eliminate from the. You thought you had 3,000 friends. He says, you know, in the real world, in real life, if you had to have a party for your true friends, all you need is this table, and they might be a seat empty. We're at a table for 4. And these are the things that you learn when you go through what I went through. Unfortunately, I'm 83 years old, and all the wisdom that I have, it's going to go to waste, because to get where I am, I had to go through these experiences, and now I'm too old to do anything. I'm lucky I can walk to my car. So them are the things. So would I change anything that I ever did in my whole life? No. Because I have the DNA in me makes me what I am. I just wanted to race. I wanted to go fast. I love competition. Follow the leader was never my thing. Music, competition, speed, and girls was my whole life. And during them times, as rough as it was, in them years were the best times I ever had in my life. And you also find out that the things that you want when you have nothing look better from afar when you don't have them. Because when you do get them, it's like, is that all there is? You know, what the fuck do I do now? I have this, I have this, I have a boat, I have this, I have this, I have this. And you find, so I had enough of everything, and before it got boring, I either shot up or shot back down. So my life was always changing. But and the one thing that they're writing, I never went into this, but they're writing a TV series now about my whole life, and what they say to me all the time is, you got to bring girls into it. And I don't talk about that stuff, but I will say this. There isn't, I don't think Errol Flynn, well, nobody knows who Errol Flynn. I had as many girls as I needed in my life. I just don't talk about that stuff. But there was never a problem with women in me. Never. I just don't talk about it. But I'm going to have to talk about it, because they keep saying to me, we have to bring women in. And back then, the only woman in the series that we're writing is Gina and Barbara, the girl at the bank, Sullivan County National Bank, that taught me how to open up accounts and kite checks and all of this stuff. But there were plenty in between. I just don't talk about them.
Did the race fixing destroy your love of racing and competition?
No, well, no. What it destroyed was my reputation. But had it not been for that scum...
But you loved racing.
Oh,
and fixing races is not racing any longer.
No, but I didn't do that for profit. I did it to save my life. I would have much rather just went the legitimate way. Yeah. I didn't fix races, and I did what I did to save my life. From a madman who had no problem putting one right between my eyes, and which he did 17 times in New Jersey. I don't know how many he did in New York, because later on, when John Gotti became the boss, he made him a captain, and now but then he wound up going to jail. Sammy, the guy I was betting with, he went to jail for murder too. They were just bad guys. That's why I fixed the races. I fixed it out of sheer desperation. I did not fix it because, like I said before, the money, I was making enough money, especially when I was successful that short period of time. I was making plenty of money. I didn't need
What's your biggest regret?
my biggest my biggest regret. I really don't have any. I really don't have any regret. My biggest regret was when hurting my mother during my childhood years when I didn't even realize it, because nothing haunts me at night when I'm sitting watching television or when I'm trying to go to sleep. Nothing haunts me more than the hurt I put on my mother during my childhood years. Just a selfish kid that had, it was terrible. I had respect for everybody in the free world except my mother. And that's my biggest regret. Everything else I did because I had to do. And after a while, it becomes basically a way of life and you don't even think about it. But I have to say, as horrible as that was, is the good times, in my opinion, far outweighed the bad. And they lasted just long enough where you wouldn't get bored before you hit bottom again, and then you long for them days. But to stay at the level I was at when I was at that level, after a while it gets boring. I mean, how much money do you need to do your daily? How many houses? I had 7 homes at one time with a girl in each of them, different states, 2 cars in each garage, full wardrobe of Armani suits. What the fuck? Well, how much, for what reason? But I did it because I race in California, so I bought a house in California. You race in Delaware, you buy a house in Delaware. You meet girls there. So that's what I said about the girls. I never forget when they built the Shea Stadium in Corona. They built a Stadium View Inn. It's a hotel, 7 floors. Had a girl on each floor. See, I'm starting to talk about girls now, because I got to remember these things because they want to put them in series. So I had, but it got to the point where, like my friend Ray Katina, he owns all these major Mercedes dealerships, all high-end cars. The guy became a billionaire selling Mercedes. And now he builds these big yachts. And now he's sitting home alone. He's sitting on his yacht. He's just, there's nothing else to do. There's nothing else to buy. There's nothing else. And now he's starting to get fat and this and that. And then COVID happens. He's scared to death to go out. The only thing I regret is what I did to my father. I didn't tell that story because I didn't tell it real quick.
Let's hear it. You want to save it for next time?
Okay.
We'll do another one.
Yeah, it's a sad story. Yeah, save it for next time.
You have a fascinating life story. Thank you, Larry.
My pleasure.
All right.